I play a character named David Duncan in the movie. He is married to a character named Zara, and he's just this fun, bon vivant type guy who's sort of very calm and very confident and, has traveled the world, been all these different places, never been to India before, but he's able to sort of maintain a calmer head when all this stuff goes down because he's got to get his son, he's got to keep him safe, he's got to get back to his wife, he's got all these things he has to do and survive this hellscape that they're now inside of. It's been terrific to work with Anthony. He's an amazing director, and even though this is his first feature film, it doesn't feel like it. Like there's never any moments of unnecessary deliberation of, well, should we put the camera here? Should we do this? Or, well, I don't know what to do here, blah, blah, blah. He's also just, his sort of like passion and his zeal for what he's doing in the story. It's just, he doesn't rest, he doesn't sleep, he just goes. I'll get a call on Sunday and he'll go, do you want to come over and rehearse for a couple hours? And I'll go, yeah, I really do. That sounds great. And then we'll go and we'll work for several. He's insatiable, which is great. I think it's a good quality to have as a director, especially if you're doing something like this and it's such an intense project. He just doesn't seem to get tired, which is nice. It's a true story, and it's based off of something that happened and something that's really intense that has sort of damaged and scarred and even killed a lot of people. So there's a sense of reverence that you have to bring to it. We're not just making a story where we can be flippant about things. We're dealing with people's lives, and a lot of them were lost in the process of this story. So, there's a sense of responsibility, especially with all the research material that we have, with all of the interviews we have of all the Taj staff and everybody. It's a serious undertaking that none of us take flippantly, and it's been an amazing process to bring this story back to life in as respectful of a way as we possibly can, while getting all the details right, while still being cautious with people, because I think there are some people that are still highly traumatized by this. So that definitely factors into how you play this and how you do it. It's just such an intense project, and so much of what goes on camera is fear-based, whether it be by design of the terrorist or just by the fact that you have people roaming up and down the hallways, shooting people. It's an emotionally charged project, and I know for myself, selfishly speaking, I go home at the end of every day completely drained, because you're manufacturing these feelings of intense terror and fear all day, and it's exhausting. But at the end of the day, you feel like you've really done something, and I hope that at the end of this project, we all look back and go, you know what, that was 100% worth it. I hope for this film that people walk away from it seeing the human side of terrorism. It's like, speaking as an American, we have this sort of blanket idea of a terrorist as this sort of like veiled, crazy, shifty guy who's willing to kill anything and anybody to get what he wants. And it's like, that's not really the case. A lot of these guys come from families where, their families miss them, and they're there because maybe they got tricked or maybe they were stolen, whatever. It's like, you see that these kids doing this are young kids who have no real concept of what they're doing. They've just been brainwashed, and it can happen to anybody, and it may have happened to me, and I just don't even know it. It's just, you see the human side of everybody on this, and I think it's sort of the first time that you see there's a sensitive side to these guys. They're scared too. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what they're doing, and I think that's a huge, powerful message, because a lot of these guys aren't malicious. They're doing it because they're doing it for their village. They're doing it, they're jihadis because they're fighting for their families. They're fighting for whatever. It's the same reason that we feel like we're fighting against that, and it's, as soon as you can understand that we're both people just on different sides of the spectrum and with different understandings about things, but that doesn't really matter, then maybe you can dissolve that tension in between. I don't know, that would be nice. I don't think a movie can really do that, but it might be a good start, a good conversation starter.
World peace, that's right.
Yeah. What do I want from this movie? World peace. And I think it's attainable.
Watching at home, I'd just flown out of Bombay when the attacks happened, and I landed in London, and the whole family was just watching in terror. And I knew if they ever, were going to tell this story about the bravery of the staff and the survivors and the great people who sacrificed themselves, I really wanted to put my face to it, and so it was a very easy decision, really. I play a young man called Arjun, and he is from a slum, and he is a waiter in the hotel. And he comes in very early in the story, and he's got a young child to feed and a wife, And the great thing about hotels are they're this kind of microcosm where all kind of stratas of society can collide. You've got the poor from the slums and the absolute rich. You see these other characters like Jason Isaacs, billionaire, and they all mingle in this space, which is this hotel. And he comes in and he's really eager to, please and put food on the table for his family. And when things turn up and and they're faced with absolute terror, he kind of rises to the challenge and becomes a man in the process and saves a lot of people. Yeah, so Anthony was incredibly collaborative, and I wanted to. I've done quite a few characters set in India before, and I wanted to really distinguish myself in this film and do something different. Really inhabit a new skin. And I'd read the script, and after having a couple sessions with him, I was like, why don't we make him Sikh? He'll have this, he'll have a beard and this long hair, and to the untrained, uncultured eye, he could face prejudice, and that's something that he can overcome. And you can also educate an audience, because there's so many different cultures and religions and faiths in India. It's such a melting pot, and it's really good because we've got that full diaspora being represented in this film. There's a real pressure to get it right. When you're doing a scene, you're constantly battling against those cinematic moments, and you're trying to ground it in a reality. And we try and keep the truth in our minds constantly. To ground these performances. Real people suffered, real people were killed, families are affected, and they will watch this movie. I went and prepped for the film for a month or two in India. Before I came here, and we spent time at the Taj. I went to, a Sikh slum there, and met people that worked in hotels and tried to pick up how to tie a turban and all these kind of small nuances that would make the film feel real. And that's the main aim, is not to come into this and exploit it, but to educate people on how these real people triumphed over this great adversity. They really are heroes. Yeah, the biggest challenge for me has been trying to keep the performance authentic and grounded. It's been a big transformation for me. With the look, the hair, the accent. I've got a great dialect coach called Raghuveer Joshi who should get a mention. We've been working together for a couple months beforehand. I speak Hindi in this, which I've never done before. But Arjun is a type of character that is trying to keep a lot of balls in the air, and there's just absolute chaos going on, and he's trying to corral all these people and get them to safety. He's really low down on the pecking order. You've got this waiter who nearly lost his job at the beginning of the film because he didn't have the right shoes, and now he's responsible for all these men, women and children and trying to get them to safety whilst thinking, is he going to get out of this? He's got a family and a child outside waiting for him, and that's really been emotionally very draining. I mean, at its core, for me, this film is about the unlikely heroes at this hotel. Those waiters, the beauty of this story, in the zoo, which is this hotel, is those people that you would sometimes not even throw a second glance at. The man, the bellboy who picks up your luggage, or the person who's delivering you a tray of caviar that you swat away, or this person or that person. It really brings out the humanity in every single person. We shine a light on everyone, from the big VIP guests down to these waiters, and they really put their lives on the line, to save their guests, because this hotel, it was their home. It was sacred to them. For my character in particular, the Taj was like a temple to him. It represented a dream. It represented ambition to a young man from the slums who didn't have anything.
Zahra is an amalgamation, is a combination of various people who actually went through that experience. And she is born into wealth and with a golden spoon in her mouth. At the beginning of the film, you'll find that she really hasn't really had to make a difficult decision for herself ever in her life. because she's been privileged. She's of Iranian descent. She's had the most amazing education in Europe. She's frequented the Taj Hotel. She's been to Mumbai a number of times. So she's very aware of that setting and that environment and the luxury that comes with it. She's married to David, played by the wonderful Armie Hammer, and she has a newborn baby, a 5-month-old baby. So she's new at all this sort of family life and being a mother. So at the beginning of the film, you'll find that she's sort of this privileged woman who is at the Taj and sort of being pampered and taken care of. And she's thrown into this horrific situation and faced with sort of this life and death impact of the terror attack. And you'll find her arc is that she is finding her inner strength and her self-reliance. So by the end of the film, her journey is one of just finding just how strong and powerful she is. The beauty of Hotel Mumbai is that it focuses on the resilience of the human spirit and how strong and powerful we can be in the face of dire circumstances, things that would normally break people. The staff at the Taj Hotel were just incredible. If you watch this film, you'll see the sacrifices, the personal sacrifices they made, how completely selfless they were in helping the guests. And it humanizes everyone in that setting. It helps, bring to life the terror, not only the terror that they experience, the guests experience and the staff experience, but also the beauty of how we can each help each other and be selfless. Anthony is a visionary. I would say he really knows what he wants. He's got a great eye for detail. His preparation and how he prepares his actors for their roles is just second to none. I've never experienced this sort of attention to detail. It was amazing that he wrote extensive history for each character, and then he worked with each of the actors to sort of hone those backstories, and it's just been a real pleasure working with him. He really knows how to communicate to actors, which I love. I think that the main difference about doing a film that's based on real events is you're dealing with people who actually experienced those things, and to honor those people. And I always enjoy delving into real life stories like this. I mean, it's an intense subject matter, so it's finding that balance of when to let those emotions go and when to draw them back. But goodness, I can't imagine what they went through. Just living in the skin of this character for this period of time. It just it makes you realize just how much we need to count our blessings when we're safe and out of harm's way.
I play Sally, and she went to uni and took a gap year and went to London and loved it and stayed there. And that's when she met Zara and David, who are the people that she looks after their newborn child, Cameron. And I think the interesting part where you meet Sally is, and it's something that I definitely relate to, and I think a lot of young people do, probably particularly Australians, of that first trip overseas where you start to work out who you are as an adult, particularly being also thrust into a family that is like so wealthy and the opulence, and she sort of goes on trips with them all the time and witnesses all of these sort of versions of high society when she was sort of from a quite middle class upbringing in Australia, and then being caught in this situation where you're trying to survive and be strong and know what to do, but also really needs to be looked after, and that sort of mix between naivety and trying to be an adult. I've never worked on a story before that's based on a real event, and I found it quite extraordinary and also quite terrifying. And terrifying because I think you feel a huge responsibility to the people that were there. Yeah, I think it changes the stakes. And what is amazing is you have such a huge, rich amount of backup material. And I became obsessed with reading people's transcripts and researching the attack. And it's fascinating. I think what is fascinating is it was a group of people that never expected that to happen to them. And so it's a lot of people caught up in something quite horrific. And the way that people responded, particularly the hotel staff, but was generally with an amazing sense of calm and kindness, and I think that's really an incredible part of the story. It's been really challenging, and I think that's rewarding and hard and scary and terrifying and all of those things, but I've enjoyed that challenge. I've also really loved working with babies. I've had every scene with pretty much a 6-month-old baby, and we sort of swap them in and out, and it's been excellent and challenging. I'm someone who would really like to prepare and know exactly what I'm doing and practice it and think about it and plan how I want it to go. And then you get handed a baby and they're completely gorgeous, but they also always do the opposite of what you want them to do. So, you know, you'll be sobbing and they'll be laughing at you, or the opposite. And it's really a very challenging aspect of making this film. I hope that it honours the people that were in that situation. And I have a lot of empathy for anyone who has been through a situation like that. I also feel like it's a very tricky subject matter, and unfortunately one that I think is becoming more and more prevalent in our world at the moment. And I do feel like, without getting political or anything, and I don't think this film is trying to do that either, it's trying to tell the human story of this.
What attracted me to this project was I live in Mumbai, and I was witness to this whole event on 26/11, and it was horrifying. It started as a rumor that there is a gang war that is going on, and then we discovered that it's a terrorist attack. So we lived for those 68 hours, these horrifying times. And whenever such things happen, we only know the statistics. Okay, so many police people died, so many security people died, and so many victims died inside. But we do not know what exactly happens inside where the attack has taken place, what happens to human beings. I had friends who, the general manager of Hotel Taj was a friend of mine who lost his wife and his 2 children. There was another friend from Mumbai. So it's a personal story. So the attraction word may not be the right word, but I think what made me do this film was that it was very important to tell the human side of this tragedy. So Chef Oberoi, his character is in real life a person who loves his job, who loves training people, who loves a certain kind of discipline. So there's an authority that comes across in the initial stages. But later on, how he takes over the whole charge of saving these people's life and what is to be done and what is not to be done, that is what I think is most remarkable about Chef Oberoi. He could be anybody else. He could be my brother, he could be my uncle, he could be my friend. Nobody would have imagined that, especially people like us who do other jobs, we don't really think that this is a situation we'll confront and this is how we will behave. But I've always believed that when you're put through a situation, your real self comes out. Either you are a coward, or you are a person who runs away from a situation, or you take charge. Whenever I work abroad, out of India, I think what I look forward to is to meet various actors who have their own way of expressing emotions. What happens is that when you work with the same bunch of actors, you somehow instinctively, it's an animal instinct, you know that this is how he's going to react to this situation, this is how she's going to react to the situation, so you're prepared for it. But when you're working with a cast who you have not known as an actor or as a person, then you are like in a jungle where various animals are coming together. And it's an animal instinct. And I love the uniqueness and the newness every actor brings in. And I think that when we did the first reading, I think that was fantastic. And then bonus is that they are wonderful people. Apart from they being wonderful actors, brilliant actors, know their craft, what they are very sincere towards what they're projecting. And what comes as a bonus is that we become friends. It's been a great, rich experience. I always believe that you take away from your fellow actors and it makes you a richer actor, not only in your craft, in your profession, but also as a person.
I was just about to go away on holiday with my kids for this big adventure we planned for a long time, and the script arrived. And it's that horrible dilemma when something fabulous comes along, and I just couldn't say no to it. And I dropped everything and rushed to Australia. It's a story that you rarely get to tell. As an actor, you very rarely get to tell real-life stories that are full of such real-life heroism and inspiration. The world is an ugly and scary place right now, and increasingly so. And this pulls the curtain back and shows you how the best of the human spirit emerges sometimes in the worst of conditions. I play Vasily Godetsky, who is a Russian businessman with an interesting past, and he is less scared, I think it's fair to say. He's seen his share of action in his life, but it doesn't make him make the best decisions, and he's not possibly the most attractive person on the surface of it. But like some of the people he's based on, these tragic circumstances bring out something in him that he probably didn't think was there. So when I was first offered this job, I was sent a link to Anthony's short film, The Palace, and I watched it before I read the script, and before the film was 2 minutes in, I knew I was going to do the job, because he's a magnificent storyteller, and there's such humanity in every moment. And so I found it to be a joy and a shock that somebody could make his first feature film of this scale and be so unflappable, and still find the space to allow us all to explore those surprising moments and those things that people might not have revealed in interview and are not apparent to anyone but the most sensitive of directors. I have to speak Russian quite a lot. I don't speak Russian, not a word of it, and so I've been learning it phonetically, and then there's somebody Russian on set, and I constantly checking to see if I'm just making an idiot of myself, and then trying to act in Russian when you're about to die or being captured or being shot at is a challenge, is an understatement. On the surface of it, it looks like it could be a film that was difficult to watch, and there is a lot of violence, and it's a thriller, it's a suspenseful thriller. What's going to happen to who and who's going to make it? But in the end, it celebrates these real-life heroics, these extraordinary events. It's just a tribute to some fantastic people, and in the most surprising of circumstances.
I first heard about the Mumbai attacks, the 26/11 attacks, pretty much like everyone else did on the news. And kind of like everyone else, I saw a burning building and a lot of distraught faces and that sort of thing. And it was really only until I sort of pretty much saw the Surviving Mumbai documentary that, you know, a totally different side of these attacks opened up. And you know, obviously it's the personal stories, it's the stories of the guests and the staff who were, you know, trying to do whatever they could to survive, but also of the gunmen, of the terrorists who were caught up in this whole mess. There's one moment in the Surviving Mumbai documentary which really got me. There was a Muslim guest who was caught up in the attacks, and she was lying amongst another group of hostages who'd been caught, and they were being systematically killed, one after the other. And this guest talked about how, you know, right at the critical time when she was about to be executed, her and her husband started reciting an Islamic prayer. And it was a prayer that had been learnt for one of their parents' funerals. You know, they were Turkish nationals, so they didn't speak Arabic. The gunmen also didn't speak Arabic in that, you know, they were from Pakistan, so they spoke a different language. But when one of the terrorists, after executing a number of people, came across this guest who was reciting an Islamic prayer, he faltered and he didn't know what to do. And the gunman did something curious. He did shoot. He fired 2 shots, but he purposely fired above the heads of the guests who were reciting the prayer, and then dropped the gun and ran out of the room. And there was something about that story that I found, you know, really compelling and really interesting, just insofar as what it said about the terrorists, but also the guests sort of caught up in it. And that was the first of many different stories that came out of these attacks, which for me made it more than just a survival story, although it is, you know, very much a survival story. You know, in a way it was a bit of a microcosm of some of the main issues and problems that we're confronted with in the world today. There were other stories like, there was a couple who had a child, and they talked about the fact that if they were both killed, their child would be an orphan. And so this is, part of this inspiration, melted its way into the Armie Hammer character, David character, where this guy was faced with this impossible decision where every human inkling in his body, every sort of cell of his body he was saying was kind of, was geared towards trying to physically be there for his wife, to try and protect her and support her, and to get support from her as well. And then the rational side of his brain sort of said, well, hang on a minute, if a bomb goes off above us, our kid's an orphan. If we both get lined up, our kid's an orphan. So in this impossible circumstance, he was kind of forced to part ways with his wife, where, they had to make this unbearable pact that, whatever happens, we're going to rely on each other to live through it, but we're going to have to do it separately so that our kid has a mother or a father. And, these, confounding dramatic questions that were some of the things that I, that initially sort of hooked me into the project. Through the contacts that were made by the makers of Surviving Mumbai, we were able to get very quick access to, a lot of the people who lived through it. There was a level of trust that had already been built with the survivors and this production company, because they liked the way the doco had turned out and how they, I guess, came up in it. And so they were willing to sort of, go through other things again that might not have been covered in the interviews. In cases where we couldn't interview them in person, we're able to set up Skype meetings and all this sort of stuff. And so we spent the better part of about 6 months just listening, just going out and, trying to find the center of a really big story. The attack took place over 12 sites across Mumbai, but the key focus is arguably the Taj Hotel, which is one of India's and one of the world's most iconic and venerated hotels that, all manner of royalty and, business leaders and politicians and superstars and John Lennon and you name it, they've all been there. But the Taj, really did become a focal point. It was where there was this protracted siege for a long time. And you can imagine in a hotel of that size, which has hundreds of guests and, many more hundreds of staff all caught up in there, you've got 200 movies right there. You've got 200 different stories to explore. And at the start, our guiding light was to just kind of, open our ears and listen to what the people were saying and to what they felt, with, to try and have as few preconceived ideas as to what the movie could be, but to more just try and, pretty much just see what would it feel like to live through an experience like this? What would it be like to get through the other side of an experience like this? How did it feel to be in there, like as a visceral experience? If I've got, my sister on the phone, or my father or mother on the phone asking how I am. I've got my friends on the other side of the room who are cramped down underneath the table as the chandeliers are swinging and bullets are coming through the window. How would it feel then? How would it feel for the next 4 hours where literally nothing happens and it's just absolute silence and you don't know what's going to happen next? Which many guests actually said were the most terrifying moments, when nothing was happening. In a weird way, when a danger was imminent, survival mode kicks in and there's a sort of heightened awareness, as I'm told, and that was one thing. But the more unbearable moments, for some of the guests at least, were not knowing what was going to happen next. And Dev was, I think, the first real actor that, we had brought on board. One thing Dev wanted to explore a little bit more was what his family life was like. In the film, he plays a young waiter who's got a pregnant wife and also a young toddler. And he wanted to get into a bit more detail about both how he felt about his family, what his family life was like. He came from a very poor part of Mumbai, from one of the really rough kind of areas, but every day he'd turn up, as many staff members at the Taj do, and work in one of the most illustrious, beautiful, majestic kind of environments that you could imagine. but he comes from a place, you know, with barely running water and all this sort of stuff, and the dichotomy between those two worlds and how he deals with it. Dev also has been to India many times on previous films. He also spent a fair bit of time at the Taj and and at other attack sites, and he was sort of, he was really interested, also in exploring the fact that even though a lot of these staff members of the Taj, do come from these underprivileged kind of backgrounds, and Taj make a point to try and hire people from that world to try and give them a leg up. A lot of the staff members who we interviewed would talk about how they saw the Taj, as a second home or as a second family. And that was an aspect that Dev wanted to explore a fair bit. There's another actor that we have, Jason Isaacs, who plays a character called Vasily in the film. He's a sort of a Russian business magnate with a kind of seedy past, who doesn't really start off the film as, it's not really a wholesome character. You'll see when you see the film what kind of guy he is. And Jason brought such a humanity to the role. The role could have been a pretty stereotypical Russian goonbar type role, as it was first written. And again, I was very open to working with Jason, who'd spent a lot of time with Russians. He's actually got Russian Jewish ancestry, in crafting his character and all that sort of stuff. With Armie, it's really amazing to see his range, where you couldn't get a more different character than who he plays in Call Me By Your Name, than who he plays in Free Fire, or who he plays in Social Network, or who he's played in our film, David. And as a guy who kind of on the surface looks like the all-American guy, is tall and blonde and sort of is built and all that sort of stuff. On the surface, he's that guy, but he was able to bring a real sort of delicacy and vulnerability to his part. He goes through the most harrowing thing any person ever could, which you'll see in the film, in regards to what happens to him and his wife and other things. And he just, he really nailed it. Like, he wasn't afraid to to expose himself and, to work in some pretty grueling, gritty conditions here in India and elsewhere. And again, was a real supporter and a good friend. So Nazanin Boniadi plays Armie Hammer's wife in the film. She plays kind of like a wealthy Persian heiress. And when Nazanin came up on the radar, and I didn't really know of who she was before that, and so I Googled her, and some clips from different films came up, but there was one thing that came up which, I sort of found interesting, so I clicked on it, and it was a speech that she gave for Amnesty International. And there was some other speeches that she was giving in Persian and others in English. And there was just something about the way that she carried herself, not when she was acting, but just, in real life, that I thought, man, she'd be great for this role. And without even seeing, to be honest, much of her acting work, I just had this feeling that she'd be great, and we cast her and she wanted to do it. And there's a scene in the film where, as I wrote it, I could never have dreamt that the actors could bring the kind of power and gravitas to the film that it has ended up having. And it's really a testament to her and the gunman who's playing opposite her in that particular scene, where your heart sort of falls on the floor. And then we have Tudor Cobham-Harvey, who is obviously an Adelaide-based actress. Actually, she's not Adelaide-based actress anymore. She's from Adelaide. I had first seen her in 52 Tuesdays, a film made here in Adelaide, and like probably everyone else, was just blown away, both by her as an actor, but also just as a person. There's something about her that you just want to sort of see more and find out, what's that ticking behind those eyes. And she's super smart, and just, I couldn't have wished for a better actor for that role. So Mumbai is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's a city of 20 plus million people, and it is just constant go, go, go. You literally can't sort of look in any direction on any street anywhere in Mumbai where there's not like 1,000 things going on at once. And then you go into the Taj, and it's kind of like the second that you walk through those doors, the air conditioning kicks in, where it's really humid outside. There's very soothing, beautiful music playing. Just the way the staff and everyone walks, it's just, you know, it's eerily calming, especially after coming out of you know, the chaos that is just general life in Mumbai. And then the further you get around the hotel and walk around and just look at it, you know, you think, wow, you know, how many people had to come together to build this and to design this, and it really is an awe-inspiring place. I hope more than anything else, very simply, that the film does justice to the plight of the guests and the staff that were caught up in that hotel, but that it also helps people understand some of the just immediate human motivations of the terrorists who were doing it, meaning the guys that were on the ground, because there's some level of differentiation between them and their handlers who selected them out of a pool of many candidates from the rural backwaters of Pakistan. And the idea that if it wasn't that 10, it would be another 10, and if it wasn't that other 10, it'd be another 10. There's a kind of an endless supply that they can draw from there, who they're able to radicalize, and who they're able, when I say they, this is the group that was behind this particular bombing attacks, but you know, the same thinking is still true for many other similar types of groups. And our film doesn't delve at all into the geopolitics of the situation. It really doesn't. And it was a conscious choice not to, because, you know, it's very much a story that's told in real time from the perspective of the people who are living through the experience, meaning guests and staff who didn't know a lot of this stuff. So what we learn of the terrorists in the film is largely through observations that guests and staff make, basically either when they're hiding and they're looking at them, you know, without the terrorists knowing, or it comes from once they've been caught and they're in amongst it. If the film does anything, I hope it's for audiences, on the one hand, to be grateful, you know, that for the most part we won't live through, or hopefully won't live through, these sorts of things, but also that we need to understand why these events happen in order to sort of combat them, and not just at a level of putting metal detectors behind doors, in front of gates of hotels and stuff, but looking at the systemic reasons of why these events occur and how they're able to radicalize these people.
I chose to shoot the film on anamorphic, which is a particular lens system that squeezes and unsqueezes the image, and it gives your pictures a kind of bigger movie feel, I suppose. It's a form of, creates a look, I suppose, that's more associated with epic cinema, widescreen cinema, and that is in a sense anathema to that documentary-like nature, so it's kind of an interesting hybrid. So for me, the moviness, if that's a word, comes from the anamorphic lenses, but I'm making the operating, the way that we're capturing the imagery, quite fluid and a lot of handheld camera work. So it is an interesting hybrid. Anamorphic was a tough choice for everyone. Everyone thought, it'll be it takes more light and it's trickier for focus pullers. It's much more critical in terms of you don't have very much area in focus when you're filming. So it's put a lot of pressure on everyone, but thankfully we have a great team. When you make a film that is a true story, you naturally fall into a kind of respect for the subject matter. That means that you push even harder for that authenticity in terms of, very broadly in terms of the filmmaking, and even for myself as a cinematographer, sometimes I'm lighting a shot or I'm looking at the set and I think it looks great, but it looks too much like a movie. And I sometimes say that to the gaffer. I say, it's a bit movie. So we sort of back it off. And that's in some ways against instinct, because obviously for all of us in our respective crafts, you're always, in a sense, the impetus is to push your own barrow sort of thing. But it's good when you get to a point when you know what is the movie that you're on. And in this particular movie, it's about pushing everything down and just kind of making sure that it's not kind of singing and dancing, and that you're respecting the fact that that it really happened. And I suppose for me, I've looked at a lot of archival footage, and I've looked at a lot of photographs, and I've visited the locations, and that's been a part of the aesthetic choices for me, is to refer to them. They're not a Bible, but they're a reference, and that was certainly a part of my process, and continues to be.
I think what was attractive to me was it just felt like a story that needed to tell. Like, we've heard lots of stories from sort of 9/11, and you know, when there's been kind of more sort of Western or targets in terms of terrorism, but when this was coming more from a kind of an Indian point of view, and there's one central character in the story who we sort of follow through the whole story, and it's really kind of from his perspective that this story sort of envelops and unfolds. So it was interesting to see it from kind of that slightly different perspective, I think. The biggest challenge is creating the Taj Hotel, which, as you know, is this very elaborate, beautiful old heritage building, which is a combination of sort of Victorian follies and sort of Indian kind of architecture. So just putting that world together, creating that, has been the biggest challenge on this film, without a doubt. When we were scouting in India, because we put all the Indian locations together, and we thought, great, we'll come back to Australia. We will build the rest of it in the studio. But of course, coming back here and then realising that there's all this great heritage architecture around and available within the grounds of the SAFC, which I didn't realise at the time, but actually has architectural cues to the real building. And so once we walked around these spaces, it sort of dawned on me that, no, hang on, we're not going to build it in the studio. We're going to get far more production value if we use these existing spaces and then build within them. One of the major challenges with sort of retro building sets within existing fabric, and because they're heritage buildings, we haven't been allowed to maybe do what we'd like in terms of kind of fixings and bolting things through the wall and putting power cords through the wall. One of the sets is the ultra-luxury suite, and when I went and visited the Taj, one of the rooms that I noticed, one of the ultra-luxury suites, is called the Rajput Suite, and that's a suite that sort of emulates the architecture of more of northern India. So you get those beautiful sort of Rajasthani kind of arches and stuff, which is not a normal part of the kind of southern architecture there. And I thought, well, this, it was a very elegant and sort of beautiful suite, and I thought this would be the perfect setting, for the ultra-luxury suite in the script. The Taj is an operating business that turns over thousands and thousands of dollars a day, and you can't stop a business like that to film in. So we've had to put the whole interior and exterior of that Taj world together out of a whole number of different combinations of locations here and in India, and sets that we've been doing, building into existing buildings. I mean, one of the things that we've done, I don't know whether you've noticed, but the Taj, right throughout the Taj, I noticed this when I went to visit it, is that it had marble floors throughout the whole building, and I came back and thought, well, how are we going to do every set with a marble floor? And we ended up painting marble, probably sort of 800 square metres of marble.
The unfortunate reality is that terrorist attacks are now becoming more and more commonplace. And what's even worse is that they're now on soft targets. It's, people celebrating Bastille Day, fireworks in Nice, people coming out of a soccer game in Paris, or listening to a rock concert in Paris, people, arriving or at an airport in Istanbul. And so the optics of terrorism now are very disturbing. It's people, civilians, it's children, it's people on dates and on vacations and coming home from work. And so it's become, unfortunately, the part of the daily language of a lot of people in the world. And so the challenge of this film is how do you portray that without it being so disturbing that people don't want to go see it? Because, the movie business, movies are an escape. And so I think people go to movies for two reasons. One, for the escape from reality, or two, to get a better sense of how to define their own reality and how to have empathy with things that are happening, and we're the latter. And so the challenge has always been, how do you make this a movie that people are going to want to go see in an environment that, and it's unfortunately becoming more and more common. I'm hoping that they're going to be moved, they're going to be excited, they're going to be at the edge of their seats, they're going to be emotionally invested in these characters, and they're going to live and breathe and bleed and die with them. In addition to that, I hope the legacy of the film is that in this world where everybody seems to be almost separated more and more by religion or ethnicity or race or sex, that then horrible things like this happen, we all come together. And so my hope is, we have a movie where it's the victims and the heroes are Muslim and Hindu and Jewish and American and Russian and every size, shape, color, and that they all come together to try to fight back against it, and tales of heroism and sacrifice, which I think are incredibly important for people to see.
What really attracted me was the amazing original story. I mean, that it's a true story, and that it tells a story of terrorism, of heroism, in a sumptuous, amazing location, in an exotic country. It just seemed to have everything that great movies have, So I was also personally involved where I was actually supposed to be at the hotel, but due to a military coup in Thailand, I never actually made it. So it was a very personal story for me. Anthony was our first and only choice to direct the film, and he brought in John Colley, amazing writer, to collaborate with him on the script, and he just immersed himself into the project. This is his first feature film, but he doesn't come to it with anything other than real maturity. Although he's a young guy, he feels like a very experienced and really solid director. I think we're making a very important film, a film that will have great resonance all over the world, not just in America or India or Australia, but everywhere.
We're thinking of doing a story about the siege on the Taj Hotel. We're trying to find a way into the story. I was introduced to a documentary called Surviving Mumbai that was one of the most harrowing accounts of the siege. This documentary crew were one of the first teams in to India after the siege and got kind of very early, raw, coverage of the incident. So that documentary was the kind of impetus for us wanting to develop a feature version or a narrative version of the film. You had people that got out of the hotel staff that escaped the hotel and went back in because they didn't want to leave their guests, because they knew the hotel and they knew how to keep them safe.
So when I read John Colley and Anthony Maris's script, I was blown away by the fact that I really didn't know a lot about the attacks on Mumbai in 2008. I think I was like many people in the West. We'd seen the horrific images of the Taj Hotel burning, but I didn't really understand that what happened within the hotel itself it's a truly heroic story, where 31 people died in that attack, and most of them were staff. And the staff of the Taj Hotel are like true heroes to me. So very proud to bring this story to the screen, especially it's also the 10-year anniversary this year, so I'm sure it is a good time to tell it.
Yeah, the advantage of shooting in Adelaide is it's been amazing so far. One, the Adelaide Studios is a very comfortable place to shoot out of. Adelaide is pretty contained, it's a small town, so we don't have to travel as much, and we were fortunate that Adelaide Studios helped us find the locations that we need, most of the interiors within the buildings itself. Coincidentally, the architecture of the studio buildings here is similar to the Taj. It was built around the same time. So we could use that creatively to build most of our sets here. It's a human story. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of intense situations that these characters go through, but there will also be admiration for some unexpected heroes that maybe the broader audience are not aware of.